Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and summer is almost over, which is absolutely crazy to me. All of our vacations are over, and it's time to think about football and then snow. And with football, I'm excited for West Seattle freshman high school football. The team starts two-a-days about an hour after I record this intro, and it will feature at least 3 kids of former K2 employees. Nigel Steer and Christy Puddock, I'll be seeing you on Thursday nights. And for you listeners out there without kids, I highly recommend having one if you can. They are expensive, and they can be a headache at times, but it is so worth it. Having a kid is the most rewarding thing I've done in my entire life. And while I don't say this on the podcast enough, man, I love my kid so much. And while football will be fun for him, the one thing that we did this summer for him that was really game-changing was sending him to Seek Skate Camp down in Oregon. And whether it's Seek Skate Camp or High Cascade Snowboard Camp or Wendell Ski Camp, if your kid likes snow or he likes to skate, these are the funnest places on earth. And my kid still has incredible memories and healing scabs that will turn into scars that will always remind him of how incredible camp was. If you want to feel like a great parent, start saving $5 a day now and send your kid to camp next summer. When they get to camp, they'll get a chance to meet my guest this week, marketing director and all-around rad dude Bobby Meeks. Bobby has had a long career in snow, in front of the lens and behind the desk, and we talk about the life and times of everyone's favorite person and snowboarder. Before we get into it, did you tell a friend about the show this week? If your answer is no, please tell someone. Podcasts are hard to find. I have the best, most researched interviews in snow, and your friends deserve to hear the good shit. So please let them know about the show. Finally, I want to keep this podcast going for a long time, and to do so, I need to keep my sponsors, and to do that, I need you to listen to their ads and buy their stuff. I only work with brands I believe in and love, and they are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, Elon Skis, and Rollerblade. Now, it's time to talk with Bobby Meeks. So we're here at Seek Camp, and before we talk about your role at camp these days, well, I don't think you came here as a camper. Can you give me your camp history?
Camp history. Let me see here. Well, if you talk to Wendell, I've worked here for a long time. I guess coached for a couple years, probably 2 years, maybe. Drove one of those little buses that they had loaded with kids. I don't know, I was dressed up as like a unicorn or something like that. I forget what it was, but they all had those themed buses, little mini buses. And yeah, I did a couple guest coaching terms here, slept at the Ark, shared some of interesting rooms at the Ark, and then also slept in the TV room one year. And I say year, but like one summer or whatever. But for the most part, I didn't even know about camp. I didn't even know snowboarding camp existed until I got sponsored by Bonfire, and Brad Stewart was like, hey, you're coming out to snowboard camp in the summer. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't know anything about it. And that's how I kind of discovered snowboarding camp. You know, a couple years later, I ended up kind of guest coaching, and the rest is history. Now I'm here and working at camp.
And you get to camp, and it's one of those places where all the pros are coming in throughout the summer, and all the kids are getting fired up seeing them. But it's also like a progression place in the summer where sometimes there's sessions that kind of happen on the mountain, and it's all of a sudden like, holy shit, there's a lot of stuff happening right here. And can you think of a session that you were around that was like a game-changing session where there's tons of pros and you're just like, whoa, I'm watching the sport change in front of my eyes?
I think early on, especially up here in the summer times, it was like every day there was something changing. Every day somebody was doing something new at the time. When you're looking at like 1996, 95, I remember when Ingmar showed up, like that's the first year that I came to camp as well. Like I didn't know who this little Swedish kid was. Like I just knew he ripped on a skateboard and he was really nice. Didn't speak that much English, or maybe he just kind of did speak a lot of English and I don't know, just didn't really talk a lot. Maybe he was pretty shy. But I mean, he kind of came out here and just crushed it. And then when Peter came on the scene, Daniel Frank, like these sessions were happening like every single day.
So mind's blown every single day you're on the mountain.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, I remember when those guys jumped over the pipe. I mean, these are, you know, obviously years where I didn't work here, but like, you know, you either hear about them or you experience them in person. I remember one year when Ross Steffi was, when he's filming for MacDog and he's like standing up on this jump that they had built. Like, I don't know where, like, I don't know why this jump it's like a big jump at the time. And there's a crazy session going on it. And Ross is running around on top going, everybody's camera's down. Put your camera down. This is a MacDog shoot. MacDog shoot, and, I mean, I can't blame him for, freaking out a little bit. I mean, because shit's going down. And it's all game changing. Like, people are progressing, especially at that time. They were progressing so fast. And yeah, it just seemed like every day there was something new happening, whether it was like a rendition of a rodeo flip or like whatever. Something was happening. And this is the place where it was.
And when you look around camp today and you look around, you see kids in Empire and in Polar. And does it take you back to like 98 and just the style, how it's all come all the way back again?
It is pretty funny. It's like you turn into your parents in a way a little bit because you're like, oh, yeah, when you were a kid and you had your trends and, your parents or adults looked at you in a, I don't know, like, what the hell is that kid wearing?
Yeah.
Kind of way, or what's up with that kid's haircut? And it's kind of like I'm going through that now. You look around and you're like, all these kids, they're all kind of dressed the same a little bit, or they got their own personal like cliques. Some of them are like in their day pajamas all day long, just skating around, or baggy pants are coming back, or bleached hair, skater bangs and mullets. And like, it's really cool to see all the unique styles that's happening. And like, I don't know, people are individuals. And I think now more than ever, everyone just kind of fits in together. Whereas before, like, I feel like when I was a kid, it was like, if you were a skateboarder, you listened to punk rock music.
Right.
And that was your avenue. Everyone kind of looked the same. And now everyone's different. You got skate kids that are core kids listening to like R&B, and the walls are kind of blurry now, even in fashion and style.
Yeah. And when you first got here to take over camp, you came in at like the worst time in the history of the world to run a summer camp, right when the pandemic is about to hit. And you've got camp set up. You've got all these people ready to have the best summers of their lives. And you have to cancel on everyone. How difficult is it for the camp to stay open? Because I'm guessing there's a ton of lost revenue. And you're just praying that you can keep the doors open for the next season.
Yeah, I mean, in my role, I came over from D.C. I took a big chance. I was just getting kind of tired of the budget battle for a little bit there. And just the positioning of where snowboarding was. And I don't know, I just needed a break. I needed to get away from that. And so coming to camp was my way of kind of going back to my roots a little bit and resetting. I knew that I wanted to still be in snowboarding, and I still want to be involved in snowboarding. And I want to be a part of like shaping the progression and, the future of snowboarding still, and giving back to snowboarding. So camp was a perfect kind of avenue for me. And when I got here, I thought all that was happening. And then, COVID hit. And it's pretty funny because I remember in January, I took the position. I got here in March, and I was like, I remember one of our first meetings here, and I'm like, hey guys, I know I'm new here, but I just want to tell you about this thing called COVID that seems like it's kind of taken over a little bit. I was in Japan, and everyone's wearing masks, and it seemed like it was a big deal. I think we should start thinking about some kind of plan around this. And everyone's like, oh, come on, it's not going to, and then, next thing you know, history has happened. And it was kind of eye-opening. I don't know. It was kind of weird. It was uncharted territory for a lot of the world, especially camps were highly affected. We weren't allowed to do overnight camps. Like, there was no overnight camps. Thankfully, we had day camps. We were available to do day camps.
Okay.
So that was pretty good. There was a lot of restrictions around that as far as like how many people you could have in groups, and like where they had to be and how they could mingle. And we had day camps where they couldn't mingle together. And like, there's so many restrictions around that, and rightfully so, just trying to contain it. But I don't know, it was really, I wouldn't say dark times, but it was like uncertain times for sure. But Kevin English and the whole leadership team here was like, hey, we got you. Don't worry about it. You're going to be all right. You just came in, and we're all going to get through this together. There was a lot of positivity around it, and trust in our culture will prevail. And it did. So here we are on the rebound.
That's pretty awesome. And then when you think back to your childhood, camp really wasn't in the plans, I don't think. I think you grew up in Fontana, California, and then you were in Arkansas half the time. And I don't think it was the most ideal childhood situation, but I don't really know. Can you explain what your childhood was like?
I had a really troubled childhood, actually. I came from a pretty broken family. My mother was God rest her soul or whatever, but she was a drug addict, and I had a troubled childhood. I grew up just in the streets, basically, like not a lot of supervision. Half the time I was running around terrorizing the neighborhoods, and the other time, I don't know, went through a lot of stepdads, a lot of abusive parents or father figures, I guess, in my life. Never knew my father, so yeah, I had a troubled childhood, and I hadn't even discovered skateboarding or anything. When I was 14, I went to go live with my aunt and uncle when I was 14 years old. It was cool. I was really raw at the time. I was troubled childhood. I hadn't even found skateboarding at that time. I was just kind of like just a raw kid, like ADD.
Like throwing rocks at cars and stealing shit, or what kind of
stuff?
stuff?
Like whatever I could do, like whatever, like, I don't know, just to get attention. Yeah, get attention, or just, to get through the day of so much energy wound up. So it was a rough childhood, but I will say that, and this kind of goes back a little bit to why I'm still in snowboarding and why I care so much about still being involved, is because snowboarding was an avenue for me. It was kind of a savior for me. Like, no telling where I would be right now if it wasn't for like snowboarding in my life. And it gave me the opportunity to see the world, to leave the turmoil that I was in when I was really young. Sorry to go back track a little bit, but when I was 14, I moved in with my aunt and my uncle. And my aunt and my uncle were put together. They were not like a wild family, and they were structured. And I battled that. I pushed back a lot on that, to be honest.
Did they take you in as their own, though?
Yeah.
And they're like, you're going to be a good kid? And
Absolutely. And they were very strict with me, but then they gave me a lot of opportunity as well. So around 14 is like that age where you're just kind of really impressionable, and you're kind of finding out who you are, And, I went from being just like no authority at all to all of a sudden curfew. When the streetlights come on, you've got to be indoors, and I was like, what?
Was this in California?
This is in California. Okay. And so I bounced back and forth when I was a kid. Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth now.
Fine.
So I actually grew up, I was born in Southern California, but I have half of my family in Arkansas, like married side of that. And then the other half's in California. So I would bounce back and forth between California and Arkansas. Talk about juxtaposition. It was like insane. I'd go from like this cool Huntington Beach surfer crowd kind of like thing, like, hey, I'm running around Westminster and Stanton, Garden Grove area. And then I would go to Arkansas to like run around in the woods and get ticks on me and like rivers. And we lived in trailer homes at the time. So it was pretty wild. But I would bounce back and forth, and then eventually landing back in Southern California. I moved in with my aunt and uncle when I was 14, and then that was when I moved to Fontana. I always say I'm from Fontana because I reset, like, it kind of reset my life in a way. So when I associate my childhood now, I kind of mostly don't associate the other stuff. Up until I was 14, I kind of just count, like, when I was 14, I had structure and parents that loved me, and there was that in my life. That's when okay, cool, I finally found a home.
Went from bad Bobby to good Bobby almost, because you talk to people about you and everyone says that you're a big personality guy, but not a big personality guy in the way that like you're trying to market yourself and be all loud. It's just like everyone loves your personality so much, and everybody wants to be around you because you have a magnetic personality. And just in doing the research on you, it made me think, does that kind of stem back to when you were a kid and you were always trying to have attention, and then you realize if you're just really nice and you're cool to people, people are really going to want to be around you? And when you don't have that many opportunities, maybe parents' friends see that you're this great kid and they offer opportunities to you too. Did any of that stuff happen for you as well, or did you just become a cool guy over time?
I think it's a little combo, I guess, in a way. Like when I was a kid, I was always in trouble. So I was in trouble for being a class clown. I was always funny, like to get attention, to make something funny. I always did. I would find some kind of like, oh, this stings, cool, I'm just going to keep doing it. Like I got kicked out of a math class the second day. the teacher was just like, okay, cool. Like, you're a troublemaker. And then the next day, like, the security came in and said, okay, we're going to name off 3 kids' names, and you guys are going to go with them right now. And then I was like instantly like put into a different class.
Whoa.
Yeah. Because I was just too much. I was just like, give me chocolate, give me chocolate, give me chocolate. Like I was just wild. So I think a little bit of that. I've always been kind of a showman on that side of things. But then also one thing that I will say, I've always, even though I had a poor upbringing and earlier in my childhood, I always have a line in the sand I've never crossed. And that's like when common sense kicks in around, like, that's not good to do.
But that means you're way smarter than you should be as a young kid, if you even thought that as a young kid, that there's a line in the sand, because most kids don't even think that shit.
Well, I think also, too, I was exposed to a lot of what could happen.
Yeah.
And that, for me, was always a big draw. Like, example, like my mom smoked cigarettes like a chimney, and did drugs and like everything else. And I always I resented that, and I didn't want to be like that. Or, sure, I would be in trouble all the time, but I had my limits. I kind of was like, okay, common sense tells me that I should not cross that line. So, I don't know. I think that that's where it kind of did, was like, I was always very aware of myself. And then, I mean, to be honest, even now, I'll sit around this table right here during leadership meetings and stuff like that and just crack jokes all the time. And, I always have to have something funny to input or whatever. But I know when it's like the time is right.
And that's what makes you you, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, I've obviously made some inappropriate timing, I don't know, funnies.
Okay. So you start skateboarding around like 13, 14 years old, and that becomes your tribe. And I'm sure you're street skating and park skating because California is like a big explosion of skate parks. Team sports, I don't think that's your thing. But in your high school, you have a swimming class, which is weird. In my high school, we didn't have swim class. We didn't have pools at our school. But you took this swimming class, and then after swimming class, you would go jump off the diving board a bit. And some guy in your class wanted you to join the diving team, but the whole deal was you wouldn't wear a Speedo and you didn't join the diving team?
You have done your research.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much summed up a lot of it. Basically, I've always loved swimming. And in Southern California, you got a lot of outdoor pools, which probably on the East Coast, they're like, what? You have outdoor pools at school?
Yeah.
It's a dying thing, but yeah, we had PE class and we had swimming. So I took swimming, and then you could swim. And if you swim and got your laps in, 50 or whatever it was, you got those laps in, and then you had free time. And free time was like to jump on the diving boards. And I really enjoyed that. And then there was this guy who used to always come and jump on the diving boards. He was on the dive team, and he was like this chiseled young man. He was just the star diver. And, I was just like, wow, what's he doing now? It's like, whoa, like, what was that? And it just so happened that I ended up taking ceramics class with this guy. And I was like, dude, like, how did you do that thing that you did, that gainer or whatever? And he's like, it's a reverse dive, So I'm like, oh, well, how'd you do that? He's like, oh, you should try out for the diving team. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't wear a Speedo. He's like, dude, he's like, everyone's wearing a Speedo. The only time you don't look weird is if you don't wear a Speedo. So like, no one's going to question the fact that you have a Speedo on because everyone else is wearing it. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's kind of makes a little bit of sense. But that was in 10th grade. And then I basically I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm a skateboarder. I don't wear Speedos. That's where I'm putting the line in the sand.
Yeah.
And then 11th grade, I just said, fuck it. I'm wearing Speedo. I'm really starting to get into jumping on the diving boards and I really like it. And I became friends with the guy, the star diver guy, David. Yeah. And to be honest, I can see how sport can help a young kid. Just the attention, the focus on something other than to be in trouble. It really dialed one. I had to make sure I maintained my grades. That was good, just on a sense. And I did whatever I could to maintain grades. And then it just taught me like structure and leadership and like to work with a team. And I don't know, it just wasn't just all about me. So that was kind of some life lessons there. But at the end of the day, I just loved flipping through the air and like everything about it. And so, yeah, I did that in summer times and it was epic in high school. And then I actually discovered snowboarding around the same time as I started diving.
It's all like 1990-ish.
Yeah, it was 1990. And it was cool. It was a game changer for me. Like all of my focus went to, well, I was skateboarding still at the same time. I feel like skateboarding was always like 60% of my life, no matter what. and snowboarding and diving took up the rest with a little bit of home time in there.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. It's summertime, which means if you live on this planet, it's hotter than ever, and that means it's time to get in the water. And Peter Glenn is the one-stop shop for all of your needs. Think wakeboard, water ski, kneeboard, tubes, swimwear. They have everything to make your summer more fun and functional. And they're a Rollerblade brand dealer, so you can take care of your inline needs as well. Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, a knowledgeable staff to help you, and a best-in-class website if you can't make it to their stores. But that's not all. They also have a low-price guarantee, free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and a hassle-free return policy, which is very important. Peter Glenn isn't one of those big guys trying to take over an industry. They're the mom-and-pop shop that you've trusted for almost 70 years. If you like this podcast and want it to keep going, please buy from Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. To find out more, head on over to peterglenn.com. My next sponsor is Rollerblade, the brand that invented inline skates. Rollerblade has been keeping skiers in shape since 1980. If you've listened to this podcast and my interviews with US ski teamers, all of them use Rollerblade branded skates to get where they are today. It's the only all-season sport that mimics the motion of skiing and utilizes the same muscle groups. So really, it's a no-brainer that if you want to get better on your skis, in the park or at speed or anywhere really, inline skating is going to make you better. Remember, running wrecks your knees, and biking is proven not to get your legs in ski shape. If you want to start ski season like you left off last year, download yourself Rollerblade's award-winning Skate to Ski app, pick yourself up a pair of skates, and get to work. You can thank me in early December when you're surprised your ski legs are that strong. To find out more about all things Rollerblade, head on over to rollerblade.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, the iconic Northwest brand that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold over 100 years ago. You remember Stanley from your grandfather's green thermos that kept his coffee hot forever when he took you out on adventures. Well, Stanley still makes that bottle and so much more. Think tumblers, water bottles, barware, camping utensils, coolers, vacuum bottles. There really is something for everyone over at Stanley, and you aren't going to find them overpriced like a lot of copycat designer brands that have popped up recently. Stanley is the originator, and they pride themselves on providing you with the best products at the best value. And that value gets even better when you shop with my discount code. When you head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping. When you check out, enter the code shredthegnar. That's all one word, all lowercase, and you're going to get 30% off your entire order. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. It seems like you have a very similar story to a lot of people. You get into the mountains through the school trip. You see snowboarding. You end up with one of those piece of shit black snow snowboards. You hike a bunch at Mountain High, and immediately you're bitten by the bug of snowboarding. You're like, shit, I love skateboarding, but this is even more fun. And does it take over almost right away? Like after you get that black snow and then you probably graduate to a better board? Is it like once you start carving turns, you realize this is my future of fun at least?
Well, it was interesting. I've been skateboarding for quite some time, and then to go up skiing for the first time ever was kind of an eye-opening thing for me anyway. I was like, what a lift. I had no idea. I was like in Southern California to Mountain High, and I went up with some older friends, and I was just skiing one day. Like I'd never skied before. It was my first time, and I don't know, it was kind of all right. But then I just kept seeing this thing called snowboarding, and I was just like, that's just like skateboarding. It's like skateboarding on the snow. Why am I doing skiing right now? Why am I skiing if I could go snowboard or skateboard on the snow? Because that's like where I feel drawn to. And the next day, I skated a ramp and was bragging about the fact that I saw snowboarding on the mountain. And some kid's like, I'll sell you my snowboard. And I bought it for $80. And then after that, it just kind of took over everything. Like it basically was like, how do I get to the mountain? How do I do this? How do I keep doing it? How do I get money for lift tickets? Everything centered around that. Joined the ski and snowboard team or whatever at my high school. Didn't even know that existed until that day. And I didn't have a car at the time, so I had to bum rides and like borrow money. And it was just like a process, but it didn't matter because everything was about snowboarding. Everything that I did at that time was about getting up to the hill. How can I get more? How can I do it again? And then this was at the time when snowboard videos were coming out, like the Burt and Chill video, Critical Condition. Those were the two that were like mind-blowing for me. And then Hard Hungry and Homeless came out, and that changed. I mean, I connected the skateboarding aspect to snowboarding a little bit, but when I saw Hard Hungry and Homeless, that was the switch. That was what was like, this is skateboarding.
Yep.
this is skateboarding on snow. Like everything about it, the culture, the vibe of it, like it all shifted from neon, Damian Sanders to being a skateboarder out there. So I don't know if I answered the question. But
I don't know either, but we're going to keep going. So you find snowboarding, but diving's what really creates an opportunity for you, because when you graduate high school, I don't know if college was in the cards for you, but you have this diving coach or a diving friend who's like, hey, you should come to this college and dive on the diving team. And you do that. You go to college, and I think that lasts for a little bit. But you were told that you should go try out for like a Magic Mountain or Six Flags or something diving thing. And you show up to like an 85-foot jump. Have you ever jumped anything close to that before?
Yeah, so little backstory. So I went to Fontana High School. When I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do or whatever. And my coach was the same diving coach at Chaffee Junior College. And he's like, hey, you should come dive. Like, come to school, come dive. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a car at the time. I had a buddy who had a car. I was going to Chaffee. And I literally was like, what classes are you taking? I'll take every single one you're taking. So I took every single class that he took. It didn't even matter. I had no plan at all, other than I just wanted to keep diving. And that was an opportunity for it. But lo and behold, I didn't have a car. I couldn't get to school. Didn't have the motivation. Took like 2 classes of ceramics. And I was completely just failing everything because I just didn't have the structure. And my coach at the time was like, hey, I see you're failing. Basically, you're not going to make the grades to stay eligible. So you should just look at dropping out this year and then come back next year. But here's an article or like a piece of mail that's like this company had sent him looking for divers. And it was the first year that they would allow collegiate divers to dive professionally. And professionally, I mean like at an amusement park or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'll give it a whirl or whatever. And I ended up doing exactly that. You know, I just happened to actually be going to Magic Mountain with my girlfriend at the time. It was like a week later or something. And I was like, hey, yeah, I'm heading out there. And he's like, well, dude, bring your suit. You know, bring that Speedo and come jump on the boards. And the guy seemed cool. He's like, oh, yeah, you snowboard. Like, he was just like, seemed like this cool dude. And I was like, oh, this sounds kind of interesting. So I show up to Magic Mountain. I remember walking through. This is my first impression ever. And I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for the high dive show. And then I see the ladder in the distance. And I'm like, oh, no way. There's no way I'm getting, Like, I am not climbing up that thing. Are you kidding me? It was like 80 feet in the air. The ladder's like 90 feet to 100 feet high. It was just like insane. I'm scared of heights. I do not like heights that well, which is awkward. But if I'm in my comfort zone with them, then I'm all right. But other than that, if there's water behind me or snow, then I'm like, it's cool, whatever. But if it's like anything else, I'm just like terrified of heights.
Okay.
Yeah, so I tried out, and like a couple days later or whatever, talked to the guy, and he's like, so I'm going to be honest with you, you're a pretty shitty diver, but I see a lot of potential in you. And he's like, we'll hire you for like $70 a day or whatever. And I was like, do I get to dive at Magic Mountain? He's like, yeah, you'll start off here. You'll be able to dive all summer. And I was like, all right, cool. So I ended up taking the job. So that was like my first summer job out of high school, was to dive at Magic Mountain and do dive shows there.
And diving for you is something that you've done off and on throughout the years, it seems like, on that big scale. And when you're jumping off something that's 80 feet tall, it's got to be scary as shit, first and foremost. But there's all kind of factors, I think, that could blow you and different things. And while I wasn't able to find anything that happened with your diving, what's the worst that you saw with a diving board? Did you ever see any real carnage? Because, I mean, that's some high consequence shit.
No, I mean, you just said it. It's a high consequence. So there's not a lot of leeway to mess up from like 80 feet in the air. And the ladders that you climb up are like 1 foot by 1 foot tri-ladder that you see like antenna lines. And the platform up there is a 1 foot platform. So it's like 1 foot square. So literally like you just climb up, get up there, turn around. There's not a lot of room. There's a specific area when you look down, you're looking at, if you were to put a plate down below you at your feet and then you just look down, that's about the size of the pool that you get to see. And then there's 2 diving boards that stick out. And so if you step off of it straight, you basically will hit the center of the pool. Okay. And so any of your dives or whatever that you do, if you jump up, I mean, you got to keep it pretty within that parameter of stepping off because it's easy to jump out.
Yeah.
And if you step to the right a little bit, you could hit a diving board or jump out of the pool. Same with the left. And then sometimes if you step in too close, there's a little bit of a walkway below the deck that you can hit as well. there's not a lot of room for error. So when you're up there, you do take it pretty serious, but, obviously you become very comfortable with it after a while, and it becomes second nature and you don't think about it. And, I've had some close calls where, I've been carrying something up there and slipped a hand, and, you're holding on for your life with one hand, like hanging off a little bit, and kind of put yourself back on and you're good to go. The worst that I've seen up there, not actually up there, I've never seen anyone smack from up there. Like, I've never seen like someone totally mess up. No one's died. I've come really close where I've almost jumped out of the pool, like to a point where I've landed with the edge of the pool about 6 inches from my face, where you're just like, stop right there at it. I've seen some stuff from the lower, like the diving boards themselves, which is about 3 meters, so a little over 10 feet. I mean, it's not just a diving show. It's like an actual theatrical show. Like, there's pirate shows and there's hillbilly shows and all kinds of stuff that you do. So there's a lot of acting and play sword fighting and like stuff like that, depending on the show. And so I've seen a buddy of mine, we were in a show together, and he like just kind of did this thing. And there's a moment where he was the captain, playing the captain, and he runs to the end of the diving board. And then as he runs to the end of the diving board, a pirate from the bad team comes up and tries to run at him and jump over it. And he jumps and he ducks. And as he ducks, he like hangs off the side of the board. The pirate goes flying over into the water. And so that happened. But I was in a whole sword fight. Sounds weird. I was in a sword fight on the other side of the ship. And I just got to a point where in the show where I get caught from the main pirate guy. And something weird caught my eye. Like I saw a hand or something weird. It was just something weird, like spider sense vibe to it. And I look and I'm like, where is he? At that point, they grabbed me, like they were supposed to grab me and hold me to like catch me. And I'm like, no, let me go. And they're like, no, we've got you. I'm like, no, let me go. And they're like, whoa, dude, you're breaking script. What's going on? So I jump up onto the other side of the ship, run to the diving board, and I'm looking around and I'm just like, where's the captain? Where's Kenny? And I'm looking around, and then our pool is not the cleanest pools. I mean, they're not like crystal clear for the most part.
Okay.
A lot of them are pretty murky. And so I can't see the bottom. You can't see the bottom of the pool. So I instantly, by instinct, I'm just like, I just dive into the pool and I dive down and I swim down. Granted, these are only 10-foot tanks. They're only 10 feet deep. But there's my buddy who's flopping around like a fish underwater. And basically what happened was he like got sprung off the diving board as he went to go into his little stance thing and flipped and landed on his head and hit the deck and then rolled into the water. And that one hand that I saw was the only thing that I saw that like threw everything off. Just caught my eye. Really weird. But yeah, I had to pull him up. That was difficult. Like to
That's
pull
crazy.
Somebody out of the water. You see it on like Baywatch or something, you're like, oh, it's so easy. Just like you saved that guy's life. It's like, no, it's a lot harder than it looks, especially when there's like a person your size and you're trying to hold his head so he doesn't have his face underwater or whatever. And you try to swim the guy to the side. And that's only like, maybe 12 feet I had to swim. He was okay though. He ended up just knocking himself out. Spent the night in the hospital, but ended up being all right.
All right. Well, that is Magic Mountain. And so you have that gig for your summertime. And then in the winter, you want to focus on snowboarding. So you get a job that allows you to snowboard all day long. And this is not as glamorous as being a diver at Magic Mountain, because I believe you're a janitor at that point. When you're at a ski mountain or a snowboard mountain, I don't think there's probably any stigma with being a janitor. It's kind of like everybody realizes that you're riding all day long. Was that the deal? Was like, hey, I'm going to just work all night and ride all day?
First off, I was a sanitational engineer.
Sorry, I didn't mean to give you the wrong title.
Okay, sanitational engineers. What we would roll. Yeah, I mean, basically it was janitor. It was like one of those things like a job fair or something like that. I was like, Bear Mountain had a job fair. And so when I had realized that I had a position, I had an income to come in the summertime, like with diving, I was like, okay, cool. I mean, that's a perfect opportunity for me to go work on the mountain or to follow snowboarding, but I gotta get money. So I had the idea to just go work at the resort. And the janitor thing, I don't know if I came up with that or someone told me about it or whatever, but I just thought it'd be a great opportunity because it works nights. And that was my big thing. I just wanted to work at night so I could snowboard during the day. And I think I started at roughly 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I worked until like 11, 12. It was like perfect. So I snowboarded every day in Bear. That was my life for a whole winter. And then the next year, actually, I worked for, and I forgot about this actually. I worked for this tubing area right next to Bear Mountain. I forget what it was called. It's like Magic Mile or something. I forget what it was, but it was like this crazy dude who owned just this area, and they would do tubing. And I would literally be a tube monitor. So I'd sit up there in a tube with my hat on, some glasses.
So like a lifeguard kind of?
Yeah, basically. I was like a lifeguard. And just kind of like, just hanging out, watching these kids tube.
From there, after your tubing job, it seems like that's when snowboarding really ramps up and your career kind of happens a lot faster than it does for a lot of different people. I mean, you go on a trip with your family to Bear and there's a contest there. You didn't know about it. You enter it. You end up winning it. That's the first big pump up to your confidence. From there, you're a rep rider for Barfoot. But then everything ramps up to where 5150 wants you to be part of their team and give you money. And it's 2 years out of high school. How does that happen so fast?
It all happened super fast. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, at the time, like anyone who could do like a 360 or something like that, and we were like, holy craps, sponsored snowboarder or whatever. But it happened pretty fast. I remember riding Bear, we rode there every day, and, you eventually become a local there, like you become part of the crew that rips with like Brian Thien, Jason Carragher, and like Travis Wood, this kid Jason Bump, and like we all just kind of hung out, and like that became like the crew there. Yeah, it all just happened kind of naturally. Like this guy BK, he's a rep out of California. I was like, dude, I feel like there's somebody following me on the mountain, like around. And that, like, sure enough, it was this dude, BK, who's like following me and watching me snowboard the whole time. And then like he just rolls up to me like in the middle of the run and was like, yo, what's your name? And I was just like, yeah, I told my name or whatever. And he was like, you're ripping on that thing. And I was like, yeah. He's like, my buddy Vipe owns a snowboard shop called H2O. You want to ride for us? And I was like, yeah, sure. I don't know. Do I get something from it? Like stickers or whatever. But like the reason why I talk about that connection, because he was awesome, like a really good connection for me. He's the one who actually brought me along with 5150 and was like, this kid, you've got to hire this kid.
So this guy found you and then he championed you throughout the industry. Like, this is my find. This kid's awesome and you're going to put him on.
Yeah. And like he like basically through 5150, they had just started up. They were basically pressing boards for people. And they had those crazy top sheets that were like structured and they had sea monkeys on them and stuff. And yeah, I was like one of the first riders for him or whatever. But then the thing that blew me away is when he was like, okay, cool. So, we want you to be able to pay rent so you can live on the mountain. So we'll give you $250 a month. And I was just like, you're going to pay me $250 to snowboard? Hell yeah. Like it was like this big accomplishment in my life at that time. Yeah. And it was pretty funny. I wrote for him for about a year. And then BK got a new job. He moved over to Joyride. And I was like, one day, I was like, dude, you went to Joyride? Oh man, that would be so sick. He's like, you want to join Joyride? And I was like, yeah, who doesn't want to ride for Joyride? Because I mean, they were the shit back then.
Like if you were a skater.
Yeah, dude, Joyride was the shit. Like they crumbled, but they were the hot brand.
Yeah.
And he's like, just say the word, man, and I'll get you on the team. And I was like, the word. I went on the team, and it wasn't then. Then I got pulled into Joyride, and then that was like a whole new thing that just, like I said, like it all happened fast, like within like a year and a half. Next thing I know, I was like picking out what shape my board was going to be and like, the graphics for it. And like, these are my new teammates and you're traveling all over the place. And yeah, it just all happened like overnight almost. I was just pulled into the world.
That's amazing. And you get a pro model pretty early on. Does anybody realize that first pro model is like a self-portrait of yourself, or are they just like, oh, Bobby's putting a diver on the board?
Well, that actually was the second one. So the first one that I had, it was a keyhole.
Okay, I thought keyhole was second.
Yeah, the keyhole one with the guy with the knife on the bottom looking in. So that was the first board. And then the second board was the diving one. The diving one was kind of interesting. When I look back and some of the things I could have changed, I feel like the diving one was one I should have like had a little more self-awareness on. I don't think it did really well. So I think it was just like one of those things where I was like, a little too close to home, a little too much insight into my life, I think. I think it had been a little more vague. It would have been better.
It's time for my second sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Elon Skis. I started telling you about Elon building a cult following in the States about 3 years ago. And if you're like me and heading to the mountain on a weekly basis, I know you've been seeing more Elons by the day. Why? Because they'll make you a better skier. The product that Elon puts into the market is second to none. I mean, Elan's a company that also makes luxury yachts, so you know they're not going to cut corners on materials or production. They're built in Elan's proprietary factory, one of the most sustainable in the world, and the difference in quality is noticeable. Walk up to any ski wall and compare the craftsmanship of an Elan ski to the rest, and there's a difference that you will see and feel. But when you get them on the snow, that's where Elan really shines. From my ripstick models to my new favorite twin tip, the Playmaker, Elan keeps making better and more fun skis every year. If you want to have more fun on the mountain next year, head on over to elanskis.com and find the pair that's best for you. My final sponsor is Best Day Brewing. And I'll tell you, I've been loving having Best Day as a sponsor, as it's really helped me change my ways. See, I'm a binge drinker. While I don't drink that often, when I do, I put a bunch back. And my issue is that, like with everything, I drink way too fast, and within a couple of hours, I need to go home because the alcohol has gotten the best of me. But not anymore. Now I'm managing my fun time by making sure that every other beer I drink a Best Day. And by doing that, I've been having my best days and nights ever. I can stay out longer, I'm coherent, happy, and I don't feel like crap in the morning. And they taste so good. I'll put a Best Day Hazy IPA up against any alcoholic IPA in a blind taste test, and you won't be able to tell which is which. On top of that, Best Days are only like 60 calories, which, like drinking less alcohol, is something that I think about these days. While I'm not asking you to quit drinking by any means, please support me and your health by heading over to bestdaybrewing.com and order a six-pack or two. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Is it around the time that you're on Joyride that you move out to Utah?
Yeah, actually, I got a call from Snowboarder magazine. They were like, hey, we're doing a trip from Bear Mountain all the way up to Salt Lake. We want to know if you want to go on it. Doug Palladini is the one who called. He was doing it. And he's like, yeah, we have a photographer, Brad Stewart, who's coming along. And we just want to know if you want to go on this trip. It'll be an editorial. And I was like, yeah, can I bring a friend? And Jason Bump was with me right there. I was like, can I bring this guy Jason Bump? And they were like, yeah, sure. So it was like Jason Bump, who was like one of my best friends at the time. Him and I living in Bear. We got on the road with Mikey Moran's little brother. Yeah, we went on this like road trip to Salt Lake, and I had never been to Salt Lake at all, and I had never ridden that type of terrain or that type of snow. It was mind-blowing. Like at the time, it was so impressionable. Like we were hucking off of everything. You can ask any of those Salt Lake dudes, were like, who are these dudes exploding in the landings? Like it would just be like everything was a park jump. Everything was like, oh, frontside 5, front 7, and just exploding in the landings because we just weren't ready for, we weren't.
It takes a while to learn how to land and pow.
Yeah, land and pow. But we went on that trip, and then we came back, and then I lived with Bump. That's the year I met Blue. Bump's like, hey, I'm going to move to Salt Lake next year. That was so sick. I'm moving. And I was like, okay, I'm going to. And, kind of thing. It's so funny, man. When I think about it, I look back and I'm like, I was debating actually staying in Bear because I was like, why would you go to Salt Lake? Dude, the park is so sick here. Everyone, all the magazines are here. Why would we go to Salt Lake City? And then, I don't know, I finally came to my senses, I guess.
And that's where it seemed like a big part of the scene was at that point, because it seems like the scene shifts from different places throughout the years. There's a big hub in Salt Lake City at that point when you move there. You bring up Blue, and he's an interesting one. He's a good friend of yours, like a really, really good friend of yours. Also really, really important to your career. But he's a dude who's quietly become a legitimate trailblazer in snowboarding. And there hasn't been many trailblazers in snowboarding in the past 20 years like a Blue, who's made such a big impact on the sport quietly, because he's not a guy putting his face out there. He's just making shit happen. But when you meet Blue and you kind of get to know him in the beginning, do you realize there's something special about this dude and he's going to do big things, or is he just like another snowboarding bro?
I think at the time it was just another snowboarding dude. I mean, you click with people, right? So we went to Salt Lake, and then I think Blue was one of Jason's friends. They know each other.
Midwest
or whatever.
stuff?
Yeah, Midwest stuff. So they came out to visit us. We were living in PB at the time, like living the dream, summertime at the beach, surfing every day, eating burritos.
Yep.
Yeah. And then we met those guys, and then we just formulated this plan to let's get a place. Blue is like the spearhead. He's going to spearhead everything and take charge and get the place and all this stuff because he already lived there. And we all just moved in together. We lived off of deep Salt Lake and Fort Union Boulevard in the Promontory Point Apartments. And I mean, it was me, Blue, and Jason lived in this apartment, 2-bedroom. Jason had his own room because he paid like $25 more or something a month. And then Blue and I shared a room. We all lived on air mattresses. Like, I think Jason had a bed. I think he was well put together. He was like, Blue and I had air mattresses, and we like shared a room. And so it was so funny. We would just go out, and we were some of the like first sinners to go to Salt Lake, I think, from the snowboarding sense. Like, we were one of the big California crews that came out, because it wasn't just us. It was like Travis Wood and Cody Dresser, and like everyone just migrated. It was like weird. All of like Bear just went like, we're moving to Salt Lake. And when we moved up there, it was just like, it was chaos. We would go to the Manhattan Club, and like we knew all the bartenders, and we just like ran it. Like, it was awesome.
That was living the dream right there?
Yeah, we were living the dream. And I remember like our neighbors would be at like 2 a.m, and our neighbors were screaming at the top of their lungs, "Get a job!" You know, like we were just wild, man. It was like we partied and we snowboarded, and that was pretty much it.
Going back to your snowboard brands, we were talking about Joyride. And I don't really know what happens to Joyride, but it seems like you leave and go to Subtle. Do you go with Mark Hibben and start Subtle, or is it something that you get cherry-picked out of Joyride?
No, actually, I got let go from Joyride. I had 2 years on there, and then, well, technically it's 3 years, and then I blew my knee, had a really, really rough season, just was on the comeback, and then, yeah, I ended up getting dropped. My contract, I should say, renewed. So my contract didn't get renewed, and so I was kind of like, well, what do I want to do? I don't know what I want to do. And at the time, I was kind of associated with the whole like hot skates crew, like with Rudy and everybody there, and this guy James who ran Subtle. And so as soon as I was, no longer riding for Joyride, those guys approached me more like, "Hey, you want to ride for Subtle?" And I was like, yeah. I mean, like they were, in the name, it was a very subtle brand.
Yeah.
But it was a cool brand. It was like,
it was the first artsy.
Yeah,
brand.
it was like artistic and like, I don't know. It was just like, it had a good vibe. It had Hibden and Jason was there and yeah, Theen and everyone. So yeah, I was like, sure, why not? Should be fun. I'm familiar with all the faces here and they're all my friends. So let's do it.
And then I feel like the really interesting part about you at that time was there was a movement in snowboarding for step-in bindings, and Shimano was working with K2 to create the clicker, and you ended up working with Shimano, right?
Yeah.
So you were on their boot program, and they were creating bindings with K2, but you weren't on K2's program. You were on like the Shimano. I think they had like the Skylord and the Enduro back then, and it felt like there was like pieces of metal behind your calf almost. But you were on that program early on. Was that something you were paid to be on, or something that you were like, yeah, I'll try this and see if it works?
Definitely paid.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, at the time, clickers, they weren't the most popular, and rightfully so at the time. They just weren't very functional, for one, and then they were uncomfortable, and then they just didn't really have very good style. And especially from our crew coming in from skate scene, I could not stand looking down and not seeing binding straps or like whatever. So I was approached by Shimano to ride their step-on, which is basically kind of similar to their clicker thing that they had. The caveat was we were able to wear straps on them. So I was like, okay, wait, so I can wear these, but I can also use a heel strap. And they're like, yeah, it's fine. The pants cover it, you're fine.
So are you rigging up straps yourself?
Yep, yeah. We would put the straps on the bindings ourselves, and then we'd be like, yeah, sure. And they paid a good amount of money.
You couldn't say no?
At the time, I couldn't say no to it. I just was like, hell yeah, I'll ride these and then I'll build them like normal snowboard bindings. But it only lasted for like 6 months. Like it was like a season and then it was done.
Is that where you meet the people that work at K2? Because there's a time when Subtle ends for you and you're talking with K2 about getting on their program. And they're like, yeah, we'd put you on, but we don't have a team manager right now. And we're not putting anybody on without hiring a team manager. Does that happen because of Shimano and you meeting people at K2, or is that totally separate?
Totally separate. What happened was I rode for Subtle for a couple years, and then Subtle was a little too subtle and went out of business. So all of the team just basically went on to do their own thing. At the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I think it was actually in the fall, and a winter had started, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I didn't know what brand I wanted to ride for. I knew I was going to ride for someone, but I just didn't want to make the decision too quickly. So this is a little off topic, but I got a job.
Like a job.
Yeah, I got a job at this Italian restaurant called Tucci's in Salt Lake City for 2 months. It was like a thing where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if like when I'm going to make a decision or what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to get a job. I have never worked the service industry before.
Okay.
And I was just like, I'm going to try it out. I'm going to do it. And I was still writing for all my other sponsors at the time, but it was something that I just wanted to do. I don't know why I really wanted to do it, but I just didn't want to wait it out and just sit around. So I got a job. This guy, Jared Winkler, was my boss. I don't know if you're familiar.
I know the name, yeah.
He runs Brighton's park program, or I think he does a little marketing, or I don't know what he does. He's a bigwig over at Brighton now.
Okay.
But he was my manager, and it was awesome. I would wait tables, and then it'd be my day off, and I'd be like, okay, cool, like whatever. And then next, I'd have to give him a call and be like, hey, man, I can't make it in today. And he's like, okay, well, what's going on? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm in Colorado. We just built this jump. And yeah, I think we're going to stay here for a couple days. And he's like, all right, well, yeah, we'll find somebody to cover your shift. And I was like, okay, yeah, man, thanks. Anyone else, I would have been like let go in a heartbeat. But this went on for months. I would be like, oh, yeah, hey, Jared, sorry, I can't make it in this week. We're on a rail trip in like Cincinnati or something. It was like all of this like excuses and he just kind of went, okay, cool, we'll find somebody to cover your shift. But while I was doing that, I was also talking to K2 because I think that it was Jess Gibson who had talked to K2. I think it was Jess Gibson about putting me on the team. And so I was talking to them a bit, and then Haley, who ran the marketing over there, the brand, was like, hey, what you had said, we're not going to hire anybody new to the team until we find a team manager. Then Blue, who was my roommate at the time, asked me, he's like, what's up with K2? Are you going to pull the trigger on that? And I was like, they won't hire anyone until they find out who's going to replace the team manager. And he's like, can I get their contact info? And I was like, what? Are you like throwing your name in the hat? He's like, yeah, I know, I'll check it out, because he was still, riding, he was still doing at the time. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll get you their contact. And he ended up getting the job. So that was my point of contact with them and how I ultimately ended up on the team with K2.
And that I hope would be understood that, hey, Blue, you're going to get this job. I'm going to scratch your back. You're going to scratch mine. Although you're friends, I'm sure he definitely wanted to put you on. Yeah,
I mean, like, he knew at the time they had like, everyone on the team's awesome, but he knew that they needed a shake up. Like they needed like a revamp to bring in some young blood. Granted, I wasn't very young, but I was still like
younger than Brian Savard.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I was brought in. Travis was brought in. Ville was brought in. Louis.
Blue brought all those people in?
Louis got elevated. I think he was already on the team as an AM, and they brought him up. Yeah, he kind of orchestrated a lot of that. And so it's pretty funny. I think that like at one point, and this was like, I was on K2 for like 4 years. And I think at one point, KT's like, what are you going to do? And Blue's like, this is what I'm going to do. And then one of the reps was like, you're going to hire Bobby? Like, isn't he kind of done? He's like, no, he's not done. I don't know. It just ended up like, he's like, yeah, I'm going to take a chance on him. And it paid off. Those were some of my more successful years on K2.
When you got on K2 and K2's going to pay for you to be in TV movies and shit like that, where people in the US probably knew who you were from your other brands, when you get on K2, everybody in the world after one full season and one full season filming, they know who you are just because of the opportunities that they're giving and the marketing that they're able to put out there.
Oh yeah, it was a night and day. Plus two, I had budgets.
Yeah.
I didn't even know the word budget until like I joined the K2 team. Like all of a sudden, next I had a real travel budget. I was filming in movie projects.
You're in standard year one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just like, everything was lined up. It was all at my feet right there. And so that was a total different than any of the brands that I had worked for before.
I would think that between shop visits, sales meetings, different things, K2 wanted you at a whole bunch of different shit that wasn't even just being on the mountain snowboarding, that wanted you to be there just to be Bobby so people could high five you.
Dude, the amount of shop tours that I did was insane. Like, it's so funny. I was always...
Were you the yes guy?
Yeah, I was always the guy like, hey, Bobby, we need someone to go over to this shop in like Pittsburgh or whatever. And like, I never turned down a flight. I'm always like, sure, yeah, I'll make it happen.
You grew up without opportunities.
Yeah, man, I took advantage of everything. You know, I know a lot of people who hated that aspect of being a pro snowboarder. I relished it. I loved it. I loved traveling. I loved meeting people. I loved every bit about it, and the snowboarding culture and like everything about it. So it would be me sitting in a shop. I'd always be with like Barrett Christie for some reason. I have no idea why. We always got paired up all the time. Like I'd be like, "Oh, hey Barrett, fancy seeing you here." You know, kind of
ACG
thing.
foreshadowing.
Yeah, exactly. But it was pretty funny. But yeah, I always was down to do whatever.
So K2 creates a ton of opportunities for you, Standard being a huge one, all those trips. But when you think about the Standard movies and all the movies from that era, it was kind of like you go out and be the rider, we're going to get the footage, and then you're going to see the movie in the fall, and what you get is what you get. And I don't think that was really embraced by all the younger people coming up. Everybody wanted a little bit more say in how they were shown, how they were marketed, and what tricks were in the movie. Because I'm sure you have tricks that just hit the cutting room floor, they don't make the movie, and you're like, man, that was like my sickest trick, and they didn't put it in the movie. Is that the reason for starting Robot Food, is to have control and not having it have to be so gnarly and making it more fun?
Yeah, with the Robot Food thing, it was like, you know, we were all filming for Standard, and Standard, you know, obviously they're an icon and will forever be cemented in the history of snowboarding. They were progressing snowboarding, you know, visually and out to the masses from like day one. You know, those guys are awesome. But we were evolving. I guess maybe our visions didn't mix in a way. Like we saw it as a more progressive, more fun kind of approach to it. We wanted to do something different. And Standard was like, I mean, no pun intended really, but it was very standard. It was like you filmed most of the stuff that you did that was like different, didn't make it in the video. It was a lot of it was like a lot of backcountry, or if it was like giant jumps like Himsedal or something like that, you're hitting like 110-foot jumps or whatever. Yeah. And those made it in the video. They got a little creative and Mike expanded quite a bit, but it's still, we didn't have the control that we wanted, and we wanted to make fun snowboard videos, and we didn't want to have to be like every shot was like, you know, this insane shot all the time. We wanted to build parts that were fun, and it made you super excited to go snowboarding. And so one year when we were filming for Standard, Jess Gibson, Pierre Wickberg, myself, Yoni, I think Benedict, Ingelsman, UC, and Travis. I think those are the team that was in Hemsedal. We just had a meeting. It was like, I think spearheaded by Jess Gibson, the filmer. And he's just like, what do you guys think about starting our own snowboard film company? You know, we're kind of like, And I remember that meeting. It was kind of cool. Like we walked away from that going like, fuck yeah, this is going to be sick. And we were committed to it. The hard part was getting everyone else on board, like all the brands to commit to it.
Well, they're like dogs. They're trained to pay the big guys and not worry about anything else.
It was tough. They did not believe in us. I think it was until like Burton signed on it. Once UC was like in on it and Burton was in on it, then it was like, okay, it's real. People are going to invest in it. Yeah, and then it just kind of grew. Like the cool thing about Robot Food was it was never one person making a decision. It was all of us, always. Like we always made decisions together for the most part, you know, that affected whatever portion that you were involved in the film or whatever.
Because everybody had two jobs, right? Like everybody was a writer. If you were a writer, everybody was a writer, but then they had to do graphic design or marketing or there was things going on. So it's way more than just shooting for Standard.
I think at the time, the industry just needed something new. And so like once we had presented something new or the concept or the idea of it, I think there it kind of snowballed after that. Like we got Nemo involved and Nemo was like in on it. After we had made the like trailer that probably people don't even remember that or never even saw it, but we made a trailer that we went to SIA with that we handed out like on, you know, VHS tapes or whatever. And it was just like this, like, we are the robot, like this, I think it's Kraftwerk song. It was just like a weird thing. It was something totally different than your average thing. I think it really generated a lot of excitement in it. And, you know, when people know that you're onto something and you're going to do something fun and it sounds awesome, then they want to help. And so Nemo came in, Trevor Graves and his team, Nemo Design, came in and helped out a lot with the computer graphics, a lot of the graphics in general. the art concepts. Benedict played a big role in a lot of the art. Like he was awesome. Did a lot of the posters and like all the box stuff. Yeah, a lot of it was hands-on, and I designed the robot logo, and me, Travis, and Louie built the robot in our yard, things like that where I don't know, just really cool. Like we were so committed. We all felt like we owned it, all the way even to Nemo and like to Jess and to Pierre and like everyone. We all felt like this was ours.
When you're putting your name on something, yeah.
Yeah, and there's energy behind it. We were just young and excited to do anything that would make the film better.
So those movies really helped change the trajectory of the snowboard movie, I feel like. It went from the huge production companies and everything's gnarly to a lot more fun, a lot more inclusive. And while maybe robot food didn't make everything smaller, things started to get smaller and more fun across the board, it seemed like afterwards. People realized they didn't have to risk their knees for every clip that they were doing. From there, after robot food is kind of when your K2 career ends. And we could be going on, and I have a lot more to talk about, but we don't have the time because I've got to get on a vacation and drive home in a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you about the winding down of your career, which is you get a phone call from K2. I've heard you tell the story before. There's like a tear. There was a moment where you appreciated your whole career, and then it was kind of like deep breaths out, and I got to figure out the rest of my life now. Would that be fair to say?
That's a good summary.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that happens, but I feel like the next job in your life, and I'm not talking about M6 where you're a little bit of team manager there, but your first job outside of snowboarding is probably the coolest job on paper that I've seen that you have other than being a pro snowboarder. You're working with Nike, and I think you get that job through Nemo, or they help hook that up. And you're going skate park to skate park, giving away shoes, giving away Nike swag, and just being the good times guy, creating those relationships like you like, meeting people and going skate park to skate park. Is that like the ultimate dream job with an expense account and everything?
Dude, it was so sick. Literally, I was off diving in Rhode Island doing a dive show, and I got a call from Nemo, and they're like, hey, Nike needs somebody. We dropped your name, and they want to talk to you. And I'm like, well, what is it? And they're like, well, we want somebody who can skate and can drive around in a van filled with shoes, stickers, and T-shirts and swag and give it out to kids and then report back.
That's amazing.
I'm going to sign me up. I instantly told my boss, I'm like, and as soon as I got hired for it, I just like packed all my bags and left. Like, it was like, yep, that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. And so I left. I moved down to Southern California, lived in Venice Beach, and I just drove the van around, the Nike van. I was the Nike guy. I drove around to every skate park. Like, I would go to like 6 spots a day or something and drive all around Southern California and just kind of loop around, skate for an hour, 2, and then hand out some shoes, hand out some stickers, take some photos, a little recap, and move on. It was epic.
That is the most incredible job, and that leads you into Nike because you eventually take a job in-house at Nike, and you're going to be working with the snowboard brand there and creating the snowboard brand. And everybody knows Nike makes amazing stuff, and everybody still swears by Nike boots. But we're not going to talk too much about your college, which is what I will call Nike, because it seems like you went there and you were able to learn a shit ton from a ton of smart people at Nike, because that's who they hire, and you're one of them, and you get to learn and be a sponge from all of those people. But eventually, Nike pulls out early from the snowboarding game. And when that happens, I'm sure it's very frustrating for you. But you don't quit your job. You stay on with Nike and you keep working with them. But when you stay on with Nike after they've shit on snowboarding and they've done it a couple times before, does that mean that you become the dude that everybody has to call and be like, dude, what the fuck's going on with Nike? What's going on with Nike? And you're pretty much the face of disappointment?
I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a good assessment. I mean, not only me. I mean, there's a lot of people, but, I remember there was a time where we weren't allowed to talk about it or, whatever.
Corporate bullshit.
Yeah.
You signed something.
But we were devastated. I remember the time came down. It was like, they got us all in a room and it was like, hey, we want to talk to you about the possibility that we're going to close the doors. And this is the reason why. And none of the reasons why really.
It's because they weren't making enough, right? We're making a lot of money, but not enough.
Yeah, well, it's also too the overhead. They're spending so much money on the athletes in general. Just the budget for that was astronomical. And we don't need to have 60 highly paid snowboarders on your team.
Right.
Like, you just need to make a team. Like, you can't have 1 or 2. You got to have a couple.
Yeah.
You got to have, I'm going to say 5.
Yeah, that's a
minimum,
solid team. Yeah.
Right? So everything was inflated. All the activations, everything. And You can see the writing on the wall where you're just like, this is not sustainable. Like the amount of money that they're making, and they'd only done it for 5 years, and the snowboarding world's only so big.
It's not growing exponentially every year.
And so, they sat us down and told us what was happening, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it came down to a line item. It's like line items. You're like, this is like, your contribution dollars towards the bigger overall budget. There's a lot of analogies like, why would we keep this along? We make $1 billion in socks,
right,
with no marketing on them. Where are we going to make 30 million?
EBITDA means a lot to them.
EBITDA, a lot. So it was devastating. Obviously, I stayed on for Nike for a little bit. Quite a few people actually did for a while. I basically moved into like quick strikes around skateboarding, and everybody would die for the job or whatever. So like,
for sure, to
work in the skateboarding department, but like in my like heart, I am a skateboarder. It's like the foundation of me as a skateboarder. But I just didn't feel right. I felt like when I wasn't in snowboarding anymore, it's just like a piece of my soul was like ripped out. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, hey, I'm out. I'm gonna go work for DC. They're revamping their snow program, and I'm out.
And when you go to DC and they revamp their snow program, they were making incredible snowboards. You're good friends with Blue Montgomery, and Blue is an owner of Capita. They own the mothership. The mothership doesn't press snowboards for other brands, really. I think they've done it a couple different times, but they really don't do that. And they have no business doing anything with DC shoes because they're a corporate company at this point. It's not like Ken Block's project at this point. They're huge. And Blue decides to press boards. Is it because of your relationship with him? Is that the only reason that they're building DC boards?
I wouldn't say it was probably the only reason. I'm sure that played a little part in it for sure. I just handled marketing for the most part, like the brand itself. But Dave Appel handled all of the boards. And to be honest, they made great boards before they were pressed at the mothership. But the mothership was a whole new level for sure. I don't know. It was really tough, to be honest. I think the relationship helped a ton. Sorry to go back on it. But the relationship definitely helped. But I don't think it was the only reason. I think we were doing good things. We just kept getting better and better. And we were getting better at what we were doing. And we were selling more, the boards were getting better, the graphics were getting better. So I think that like when we had talked to Blue about the mothership, a lot of it too was like, they make the best boards.
Yeah.
So why not switch factories over to the people who make the best boards? It was kind of like a no-brainer. And I guess maybe the relationship helped open the door for that.
Right.
For sure. But I give a lot of credit to the team, to Dave Appel, and his ability to navigate that. He did a really good job of just spearheading that transition.
Okay. And at this point, I'm going to say that this is our podcast, and it's time for something that I call on the show Inappropriate Questions. And this is basically where I get someone that to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I was able to get an absolute legend to ask the 3 questions for you. I need to find my phone. It's in my pocket so I can actually pull it out. I was able to get Peter Line to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. Peter, this is probably the least favorite of his things to do, is to come up with stuff and be recorded on the spot. But he was happy to do it because it was Bobby Meeks, and Peter came up with 3 inappropriate questions. I'm going to cue them up right now, and then I'm going to play them for you. So are you ready for inappropriate question number 1?
All right, first question. Bobby, I heard a rumor way back that you were propositioned by Madonna. Is this true? And can you elaborate on this?
To be honest, I did not. It is not true. I know.
It's okay.
I don't know where that rumor came along, but somewhere along the line, that rumor got out that I had been propositioned by Madonna. And I have no idea why that got out there.
But you've heard about it for years from other people? Like people have asked you questions like, dude, do you hook up with Madonna?
Yeah, exactly. I think I was at a bar with someone who kind of maybe looked like it or something. I don't know, but I don't know how it got out there. But no, unfortunately not.
All right. Well, that was question number 1. I'm going to jump into question number 2.
Bobby, question number 2. You worked for Nike for many years. What is your take and observation on Nike entering the anti-sellout snowboarding industry, being such a huge corporate brand? Why do you feel Nike got a pass when other non-snowboarding brands were annexed?
Good question. That's a great one. A few reasons why, I think. One is they hired the right people. Number 1, I mean, they tried to get into skateboarding for so long, and then it wasn't until they just hired a bunch of skateboarders that it actually worked.
Right.
So they just took the same formula and moved it into snowboarding. I just happened to be the first one of the dominoes for that. And then we just continued to hire people that had a name in snowboarding that were snowboarders. And so it was just different than like how they had approached it in the past, where they just hired people who snowboard.
Right.
There's a difference.
It's kind of the who you know mentality.
Exactly. So that was one of the reasons. And then two, they have a lot of money. And with a lot of money, like come big budgets, and big budgets enable you to do whatever the hell you want to do. And so when we started Nike Snowboarding, we could do whatever the hell we wanted to do. And when you have like that ability to just come up with rad shit and just be able to have somebody fund it, it's amazing. And some of the stuff that we did didn't even really have anything to do with snowboarding, so to say. It ultimately landed on the product because we always tied it back to like some type of product. But that enabled us to like the ability to just do really cool stuff. Another thing that enabled was the ability to hire an amazing team right off the bat. We couldn't go out and be like, oh, we're just going to buy our way in. And I know that it sounds contradictory to what I just said, but like,
it's calculated by.
Yeah, it's like we're putting our money in the right spots. And those right spots are giving back to the culture of snowboarding in a way. And then and hiring the right people on the team. So like, it wasn't like, oh yeah, let's go get Shaun White at the time. It was like, who do we want to get? And it was like Justin Benny, Laura Hadar, Austin Smith, like all of these like, you know, young core
underground
kids.
Heroes.
Yeah, underground dudes who were just ripped and like had style and were also fans of Nike. So that was like our approach on it. And I think that was one of the reasons why we were successful. And then the final reason, I think, was just they did amazing product.
Product is king. The
product is king. And ultimately, like, people were they poo-pooed on the fact that, like, Nike was coming into the industry. And, like, I'm not going to lie, I had doubts, you know, like, oh, man, what am I doing? Am I helping to usher in this big bad devil that's coming in and they're going to corrupt snowboarding or whatever? But, like, at the end of the day, did you use your powers for evil or did you use them for good? You know, and we tried to use them for good and those resources. And so we made great product. And in turn, it raised price points. It made everyone else have to make better product. And then all of a sudden, like all snowboarders in general, pros were getting paid more because Nike was paying really well. So everybody else started paying their riders really well. I mean, this didn't last, but you know, it's a fantasy, but like, for a good time there, our team was flying first class overseas.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, we treated the athletes like they would be treated if they were like a soccer athlete, you know, or like a basketball athlete. So it wasn't just one thing. It was a bunch of things. And, you know, obviously there's a big fan base of Nike anyway. So, yeah.
All right. So we are going to jump into your final inappropriate question.
Bobby, you lived and snowboarded in Utah for many years. This being a considered conservative state with many conservative snowboarders, and on the versa, I don't know if that's a word in this term. I think the first part is right. In your observation of these two types of Utah snowboarders, okay, go ahead, since you interrupted me anyway.
You could ask who are those extremes that he saw in Utah, him living there and seeing both sides. You can judge a career, you know, successfully, but who was the most extreme on the conservative side and who was the most extreme on the party side? And did that impact one's career more than the other?
Ooh, that's not good. You can just use yours. Okay, we'll use yours. And you can just record this whole thing of me saying you can use yours.
Oh, Peter. I love that, dude. I'm not going to name names, really. Okay. I mean, maybe I will, a few of us. When like our group came to Salt Lake, and maybe there was a group before us, I have no idea. There's always people before you. But like, we brought a lot of people, a good group that really liked to drink and party and have a good time. Like most of the people, we were also pro snowboarders. We were also focused on snowboarding, but we were also focused on the good times.
So who was the most fun?
I don't know. I just say like our house.
Okay.
I mean, like we had a house with a bar in it. Like we literally rented a house for a year with pink carpet where J2, myself, Blue, Ethan had a bar in it. Downstairs, like a legitimate bar where we threw parties where just, I mean, they were all time, like Halloween parties, and like people just came. There was sometimes people just show up just to come down and be like, yeah, I want to grab a drink. And you Yeah, you go to the bar. It was like an open bar.
So we can say that all four of you are the most fun because you guys had a great time. But then if you look at the flip side of it in Utah snowboarders that you were around at that point, who was the most conservative and maybe the least fun if you're at a bar?
The least conservative probably wasn't at the bar,
Okay.
so to say. But, you know, most of the kids that grew up in Utah, and like I said, like I'm not trying to throw them under, like, I don't know, not a negative content.
There's nothing wrong with being conservative.
Yeah, they were very conservative. Like, example, like JP and Jeremy and their crew were completely opposite from our crew. And it's like we came together every once in a while and we're all homies, but like they were very focused on snowboarding and the act of snowboarding. And we were really focused on kind of snowboarding and the act of like partying too. I felt like there was two different types of factions, so to say. There were the people who moved on to have really successful snowboarding careers and they were very conservative. And then there were us who had semi-successful careers in snowboarding and also had a lot of fun at night.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess if you look at it like over the long haul, a lot of the guys who had a lot of fun at night are still heavily involved in the industry these days.
Yeah. And the people who are conservative on that side are still probably doing it.
Yeah.
You know, they're
sure.
still doing it. And so like there was like that side of it. There was like, I don't know if I hate to say like Jeremy and JP and all these guys because they were like, I don't want to use the word conservative. I want to use the word focused because they were focused on their snowboarding careers and the fun part of that where we were focused on more of an all around type of approach, a lifestyle approach. Yes. Yeah. So there was like those two. So I wouldn't call it conservative so much. I'd be like, those guys were very hyper focused on snowboarding and they were really, really good at it. Yeah. And we were focused on snowboarding and we were okay at it, but we also were highly focused on the lifestyle of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about both houses or both groups of people that you're talking about, if you're to be like, hey, you know, in 1999, who's the one that sticks out? I mean, people are going to say JP. They're not going to think of anybody else, like, you know, or Jeremy Jones. They're not going to think of your side. They're going to think of those two dudes just because of what they did was so impactful because they were so laser focused.
I mean, it's insane. Like those two kids, Jeremy and JP, when they rode for Rev back in the day, it was like those dudes were already legends locally. Like, and Brandon Ruff and like Brandon Ruff and those guys, like, I'm not going to lump them. There was like the local scene that were punk rock and they snowboarded and they were really good at snowboarding. But then there was also like a California scene that came in, like, and we were all kind of I wouldn't say Cali, but like we were all the party scene that came, the lifestyle aspect of it. And then there was the very highly focused on the job at hand. The good thing about that was everyone was homies, everyone was friends. We all saw each other at the same places or whatever, just not at the bar.
All right, well, that's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And then when I look at your life and times, it's like, and I've said this to a few people recently, you weren't born to be a professional snowboarder. I mean, it all happened to you, but it was like you were born into a shitty situation, and thank God you had your aunt and uncle to kind of ground you and kind of give you a platform to figure out who you were. And then you have skateboarding and snowboarding to figure out what your passions are. And you're able to make the most out of every opportunity that came up. And I look at it as like when there aren't that many opportunities from 0 to 14, it's like you are going to maximize everything that you can do in life. And you're still doing it here at camp. My kid's here this week and he said it's the best time of his life. And I credit to you, Kevin English, and everybody who makes this place so special. So thank you for your time. And that's our podcast.
Cool. Thank you.
So that was time with Bobby Meeks, and he was exactly as advertised. A really cool, nice, and funny dude who was down to do whatever he can to help the causes of skateboarding and snowboarding. It's refreshing to hear the passion ooze out of Bobby, and while his life sucked in the beginning, it sounded like that different childhood never really got Bobby down. He seemed to always be moving forward and making things happen for himself. And that's what life takes, not just snowboarding. We are all dealt a hand that we have to play in life, and while some aren't as good as others, it's how we play those hands that make things different. And Bobby, through his hard work and great personality, he was able to take a shitty hand, the flop worked out for him, and he was able to make his life an incredible one. That's the podcast. I want to thank you for listening and ask you to rate the show wherever you listen and submit a review. If that review is funny or it has some substance to it, I will read it on the show. And if I do that, you are going to win a limited edition Powell Movement something. All you need to do is, if you hear your review read on the podcast, email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com. Send me your mailing address and I will ship you something, and it will be cool. If you have any questions or concerns, that email address is the place to send them as well. So thank you for that. Thank you for listening. And finally, please support the brands that make this show happen. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, Elon Skis, and Rollerblade. Have a great week, everyone.